Sometimes you make art to market your parents' business, and then they make you feel like garbage, and then you reflect on that for a while and wonder how you can improve, and then you do, and then you have objective measurements from other people that describe that they're actually engaged with your stuff. Sometimes you follow in your parents' footsteps to create a God centered business, and then that actually works. And in the process, you learn that God is more than just a guy. Then you reflect on why somebody would be motivated to snatch that experience from you and make you feel worse about it. Like, what do you stand to gain from making me feel like I'm not accomplishing the things that I am? Presumably, we could share this experience, and instead, you're making me feel worse about not having resources. So you do what you, pardon. So you do what you can without resources and see where that goes. And it turns out a lot of other motivated people who don't have resources can learn from what you're doing. Motivation can be contagious, and demotivation can stick with you for a while. Having a streak pet on TikTok can be motivating. Cheers. Software engineering isn't as competitive as people describe it to be, but there's a lot of noise, and the people who hire software engineers tend to have pretty specific expectations. Part of the reason for this is a lot of people who enter the leadership positions are the kind of people who are motivated to do the things that are necessary to reach leadership positions. I stumbled through that sentence because I thought about it as I was saying it. It is possible to study leadership and put leadership practices into practice, and the people who do, and wonder why other people don't. Sometimes the reason they've had the time and resources to study leadership are because they've had the time and resources. Like the kind of person who has done that has had the time and resources, and the expectations they have for other people aren't very generalizable. And it isn't so uncommon to. It's hard to describe the hiring process because a lot of it is just who you know and being in a space with them long enough for them to recognize that you know what you do. So, trying to find an abstract person who fits the bill often results in replicating the social structures that made it possible for the leader engineer to enter that space. For example, if somebody says, I want to hire Stanford engineers or Stanford computer scientists, then they might say that because that's the process they went through, ignoring that they're part of a cohort that received signaling that people who are motivated to do things go to Stanford. It might be the case that after their cohort left and achieved something, people expected that having the name brand would give them the skills. Industry-wide, pardon, industry-wide, this is something that we're trying to resolve. Having a credential doesn't necessarily mean anything about your relationship to that credential. And being able to describe a relationship to process, you can do that with projects. There are some bogus metrics like, is your project online? Which isn't really something that you can directly control, although you can describe what you've done to make your project accessible. And there are web content accessibility guidelines, so presumably someone who wants to get hired into web development or software engineering can study web content accessibility guidelines and pretty much just go through a roadmap for what software engineers are expected to do. The reason this approach isn't tremendously common amongst software engineers is that a lot of people didn't take the kind of math that would make that approach obviously more successful. And describing that approach as the obviously more successful approach sometimes means people get far. Like, you can say start from first principles, and it doesn't imply that someone needs to take linear algebra. But per domain, do we know what those first principles are? And can we apply that to the ways they change over time? And here is where linear algebra and calculus become more relevant. And pretty often, calculus is divided into levels like Calculus 1, Calculus 2, and Calculus 3, and those are often different than differential equations. It is possible to have a teacher who teaches you parts of calculus in pre-calculus and parts of differential equations in calculus and parts of linear algebra in any of the subjects. And it's also possible to look at a syllabus as if it is a prescription for what you should know and how you should focus. Universities are designed to prepare, pardon, Universities are designed to prepare cohorts of people for society. So the curriculum anticipates that some people aren't going to pay attention and others are going to be so motivated they create a contemporary project that their peers love and can learn from. An ancient university can understand that motivation dictates what we focus on and what we want to learn. How we learn, I should say. If we aren't motivated to learn the thing that we're traversing, then we aren't going to learn it, we're just going to get through it. A university that's been around for a while can know this and not have the individual attention to adapt their material to a new population. This has encouraged many people to reject the concept of degrees, but the degree is the reason why people go to college pretty often. So removing that as a motivation can be demotivating for the people who want something tangible at the end of a process. Like at the end of Chronicles of Narnia, when they exited the wardrobe, how did they know they had the experience? The takeaway from this video is that software engineers don't technically need to know linear algebra or calculus to be successful, but some of the decisions you would make only really make sense if, well, we can structure our code bases like scientists, and we can use math to do that well. Cheers. One approach to marketing that's falling out of style is to treat it like you're programming an abstract audience to want the thing that you're giving them, which creates patterns of dependence. That pattern of programming it's not sustainable. Like you can technically do it, but it isn't associated with the reasons why humans want to engage with the things that they create. So over generations, I'm not sure if this is just because it's been happening for generations. Over time, there's ideological drift between the thing the marketer wanted to program into human psyche and the things that make humans exist. We can be aware of that and start to do different things, sometimes rejecting what we make available. How do I describe this? Cultural normativity does involve groups of people saying this is the way that we're doing something, and then we just kind of follow what the group is doing, and that makes things work because that's the thing that groups do. But it's also possible for members of the group to talk about why we're forming these groups and following what everyone else is doing. Like when we see the latest new fad, do we buy it because we want a relationship to the product or because we want a relationship to the act of purchasing something that everyone else is? A different approach to marketing is to describe your relationship to an ecosystem and describe how you want to relate to that ecosystem. Then, from the ground up, making whatever you've built more learnable. I appreciate when this is associated with an annual tradition because every year we can compare what we've created from scratch this year to what we created from scratch last year. Cultural normativity is going to exist, and the platforms that we use to communicate impact the ways that we normalize our social structures. So we don't really need to directly contribute to that unless we recognize that there are impacts on broader groups, and we can talk about that. My major in college was learning and education studies with a concentration in applied learning science, and I noticed that the things I tend to want to buy, I've learned are the best for whatever combination of values I can apply at the moment. So when I go to the art store and I get canvases, and I get canvases because I reflect on what I want to represent, and I also think about the supply chain and wonder, could I order this online and have it be cheaper? What happens if every person does that? We can all buy canvases directly to our homes, and that impacts traffic. It makes more cars necessary on the road. That increases pollution. We can also have a tradition about going to the paint store and getting canvases, and the reason why they're there are because the canvas truck went to the paint store. There is marketing that can make someone desire a canvas and recognize that they can click a button and have it delivered directly to them. We can also have conversations about supply chains and which things make other patterns more likely. Sometimes when I'm at the craft store, I get a candy and I reflect on that candy. It's usually a dollar or two, probably less than a dollar if I'm getting it. And I can look forward to sometimes eating the candy at the craft store. Well, not at the craft store. I can keep the candy in my pocket and reflect on what it might taste like for however long, and I appreciate that experience. Can't do that online. And there are other structures that I can engage with online that feel similar, which I can reflect on after having that experience. Today is December 13th, 2025, which means for me, it's release day. If you want to order gifts for people to arrive by Christmas, I would recommend doing it today, tomorrow, or the day after. I'm also going to be working on a Christmas special and some holiday gifts associated with that. That's going to be what I promote, and the creative people who contribute to that space are going to benefit from it. Let me know if you're interested. Cheers. My major in college was learning and education studies with a concentration in applied learning science, and I dropped out. I didn't drop out because I was done with school. I dropped out because I noticed, not even noticed, as I was going through school, having conversations with professors, faculty, staff, faculty. I think that professors are part of the faculty, and staff depends on which organization structure you're referring to. I meant to say administrators, faculty, and students, like the people who run the organization, the people who teach in the organization and conduct research, and the students. I was wondering why everyone was there because I struggled with nihilism for a while. And asking people what they were looking to gain from the experience of attending university, even if they weren't actually students yet, or actually, I need to start this one over. I went to college because I thought that college was the place to learn and prepare for the world after college. But then I wondered, why are we preparing for a world after college if my coworkers are on a college campus? A lot of the people who I learned a lot of life skills from worked for the same restaurant that I did. Some of them had degrees and weren't doing, well, yeah, their degree didn't directly prepare them to work for the restaurant that we worked for. And the reason they remained on campus was because they were surrounded by people who were motivated to be in that environment. So I wondered, what are we preparing for? What is the thing that's after this thing that we're experiencing currently? So I went to college with the question, how do transistors work? Expecting that I would graduate as an electrical engineer who wasn't just an electrical engineering student, with a starting salary that was around $85,000. I didn't really have a concept of money because work wasn't accessible to me before I was a college student. It just wasn't really valued to associate economic agency with the verbs that I could do in my family. So the idea of having a starting salary was an amount of money that I didn't have a concept for, and I was pursuing something along that journey. And I wanted to know how transistors work. How transistors worked? Not sure the grammar there. I was motivated to answer a specific question and participated in research in the Photonic Systems Lab where I met other people who were trying to answer very specific questions. The professors and postdocs that I worked with had such specific wonder that they sustained for years that I started to question why I had the shape of wonder that I did. If there were other people who could successfully wonder about the same thing for that many years, why was I going through this as if there was a discrete moment that would prepare me to enter a world I could observe existing alongside me? I also took a course called, I forgot what it was exactly, Intro to Alexander the Great and World Religions, and those changed the way that I viewed time. I also assisted a geologist sorting research papers as a, well, at the time it felt like it was just a standard desk job, but those don't really exist the same way because it really did feel like the skills I gained from that job are just skills that applied for the rest of my life. Throughout the rest of the life that I'm leading, ooh, this is going to be interesting to look back on. Is that ominous? Like, to a certain extent, we do shed parts of ourselves as our skills change and our focal points change. So, there are skills that I don't directly associate with my job working for a geologist. And now my outlook on life doesn't include nihilism. I do feel motivated to actually do things that are part of a cohesive ecosystem. This is related to an updated model of nutrition where I'm not just trying to get enough calories to make it to tomorrow, I'm also trying to eat the right nutrients to give me energy, to make it possible for me to share what I'm trying to accomplish. Anyway, I noticed that I wasn't learning as quickly as I wanted to answer the specific question that I had about how transistors worked from a fundamental level. So I was curious if there was a way that I could use the online resources and make them more of a curriculum that I could navigate as a self directed learner. The language that I had at the time was, what if we improved Wikipedia by making each paragraph something that was owned by a student organization called Student Body for Meaningful Education? And as students went through the curricula, they updated the article based on projects they had. So the idea here was project based learning that was maintained by the student body, ideally, a decentralized version of student council that was going to improve Wikipedia. Wikipedia has a lot of articles, and the goals they have for increasing the cohesion, for making it navigable, do what, like, Wikipedia does what it does pretty well. And there are other sites that do different things and often do those things well as well. Anyway, while I was pursuing this project to improve Wikipedia, I noticed that I didn't know enough about the fundamentals of learning to do what I was seeking to do. I wanted to create a platform for self directed learners to create their own curricula and contextualize the meaning of that with a student organization, like some sort of structure beyond themselves. And to do that, I switched majors or declared my major. I didn't originally get accepted into the electrical and computer engineering, pardon. I didn't originally get accepted into the College of Electrical and Computer Engineering. Originally, I was in the Division of General Studies as an undeclared major, and I eventually declared my major as Learning and Education Studies, with a concentration in applied learning science. This is where I actually learned how learning works from a fundamental level, and a lot of the questions that I had until that point weren't shaped as if I could structure learning from a fundamental practice. I didn't really consider which environments made it possible for me to consider new ideas for new amounts of time with new people with new perspectives. A lot of that just happened, and I didn't have language to describe why. The courses that really stood out to me to help along this journey were learning from text, taught by a professor who I also was like, I was in their research lab. Saying I was a researcher feels like an inflation of title. I was a research assistant to some extent in the same lab or in the lab that was taught, directed, led. The verbs here do break down a bit. The professor who taught learning from text was also responsible for leading the adult learning lab. And I also took a cognitive psychology course that shaped the ways I interpreted the fundamentals because I had a bit of a software background. My dad had a business meant to help career coaches organize their career coaching business, and I learned software to address financial stress. Having the language of cognitive psychology introduced me to the idea that maybe our brains have a lower level programming construct And if we want to learn, maybe we can program our brains. I was also pretty depressed throughout this process because the concept of meaning was dissolving and the language that I had to share didn't land in the spaces that I had access to, really. So I was going through therapy, specifically cognitive behavioral therapy. This journey through education was actually perfect for developing software engineering skills, not necessarily perfect for sharing what software can mean, because a lot of that is just the experience you have with your own voice. Thankfully, there were other experiences that I had that helped me develop my voice. I really appreciate TikTok for this. More on that later.